The moment I overheard his affair partner call me boring on the other end of that phone, my entire body went numb. I was sitting in the quiet kitchen, the last strands of sunset casting long shadows across the floor. My husband's phone rang on the counter and I'd picked it up out of reflex, expecting maybe a spam call or a coworker. Instead, I heard that woman's tinkling laughter, her voice dripping with confidence as she teased my husband about how dull his wife must be, how that must be the reason he kept sneaking away. My heart clenched, a swirl of hurt and rage blooming in my chest. In that split second I realized everything was about to change. She thought I was too meek to do anything. Too boring. If only she knew how far I'd go once my back was against the wall. That I remember not so long ago when my husband and I first met at a volunteer event in college. He was the charismatic one, always in the thick of conversation, while I managed sign-up sheets and supplies. We'd locked eyes over a table stacked with donation boxes, and something about his easy grin and playful banter drew me in. Our first date was all laughter, endless conversation about shared interests in art and nature. We married 3 years later, convinced we'd found our best friend in each other. For nearly a decade, I believed we had a sturdy, if unremarkable, life. A comfortable house, modest jobs, weekend barbecues with friends, and the occasional date night. It was a routine, sure, but I never minded. I felt secure in routine, yet over the past year, I sensed him drifting, though I refused to label it as suspicion. At first, the changes were subtle. He started guarding his phone more closely, disappearing to take a quick call. He'd mention new client dinners or work travel that never quite matched up with the mild-mannered environment of his actual job. I was naive enough to let it slide. Maybe his job was just picking up. Maybe he was aiming for a promotion. Meanwhile, I teased him about not forgetting me in his busy schedule. He'd offer a quick peck on the cheek, telling me to be patient. I'd laugh it off, continuing with my day. But inside, a tiny knot of worry formed, growing each time I saw him slip away with that furtive look. One evening, I tried to initiate a casual talk about our relationship, whether he was happy, if he needed any changes in our routine. He brushed me off gently, calling me worrywart, insisting everything was fine. I forced myself to trust him. I reminded myself I was no detective and prying too hard might push him away. The thought of him ever cheating never seriously crossed my mind. We were each other's best friend, or so I believed. But then came the phone call that sealed my fate. The memory of that night is etched in my brain. The ringer echoing in the still house, me reaching for it absent-mindedly, expecting some random telemarketer. Instead, I heard a female voice, breezy and confident, greet my husband by a nickname no one else used. My name was never uttered, but her mocking giggle said everything. She teased him for leaving her alone at some event, said she couldn't wait to see him again, and joked about how boring wives made for a dull home life. My heart pounded. I slid the phone away from my ear, ended the call, and stared at it in shock. My body quaked with a betrayal so potent I thought I might be ill. That he came home late that same night, breezing in with a pat on my shoulder, as though nothing had changed. I watched him quietly, chest tight, words strangled in my throat. If I confronted him right then, would he lie? Confess? Spin a story? Or would he just call me paranoid? In the end, I said nothing. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized if he had the gall to conduct an affair, and if she dared to mock me as boring, then maybe I was done being the mild, trusting wife who never made waves. A plan took shape in my mind. I'd ensure he faced the consequences of his betrayal, that he'd lose both the mistress and me in the process. For days, I played the part of the unsuspecting spouse, gathering information. He remained as sloppy as ever. Late-night texts, hush-hush phone calls. I installed a small tracking app on his phone, a step I never thought I'd take. My heart pounded with guilt each time, but the fury from that scornful boring label pushed me forward. I soon gleaned that his paramour was a co-worker, or at least a colleague from another branch, someone he met regularly under the pretense of client lunches. The GPS logs and the phone records told me everything I needed. Times, places, the occasional hotel receipt. My husband had woven a tangle of lies, and each day I found a new strand of evidence, yet I forced calm. If I confronted him too soon, he might spin more elaborate excuses or try to salvage his affair in secret. Instead, I waited for the perfect moment to confront them both at once. I wanted her to see that the woman she dismissed as boring was far from helpless. The opportunity presented itself when I discovered his lover's name, Miranda. She was apparently hosting a gathering for his department's upcoming project, a small after-hours soiree at her home. He told me some vague nonsense about a corporate event, and that I wouldn't be interested. I swallowed my retort, acting clueless, and traced the details from his phone logs. The date, time, address were all there. So I planned an ambush that he left that evening in a crisp shirt I'd never seen before, brimming with nervous excitement he tried to mask. I kissed him goodbye, my stomach roiling. Pepper, our dog, whimpered at the tension in the air. After he drove off, I waited half an hour, enough time for him to settle in. Then I changed into a black dress that gave me confidence, hopped into my car, and headed to Miranda's address. My pulse pounded so loud it drowned out the radio. Betrayal can either paralyze you or galvanize you, and in that moment I felt galvanized, steeled to reclaim my dignity. Miranda's home turned out to be a sleek suburban house with a well-manicured lawn. Cars lined the curb. Lights glowed in the windows, silhouettes of people mingling inside. I parked discreetly down the street, heart thundering as I approached. The front door was slightly ajar, music drifting out. I spotted my husband inside the foyer, chatting with a small group, all holding wine glasses. The sight twisted my stomach in knots. He looked so at ease, so comfortable in his double life. I hovered for a moment, steeling myself for what I was about to do. Then, mustering every drop of courage, I stepped inside. No one stopped me. A few people glanced my way, possibly assuming I was another coworker or friend. The music was moderate, festive. In the living room, I spotted Miranda wearing a tight red dress, effortlessly commanding a small circle of admirers. Standing next to her was my husband, leaning in intimately. My breath caught. This was it. The hush in the air felt almost electric as I strode across the room, ignoring curious stares. I approached them, that hateful word boring replaying in my mind, fueling my composure. My husband's face turned pale when he noticed me. Miranda raised an eyebrow, scanning me up and down with thinly veiled contempt. Her lips curved in a mocking smile as if challenging me to speak. My heart pounded like it wanted to escape my chest, but outwardly I forced a serene expression. "Hello," I said, voice crisp. "I'm afraid you forgot to introduce me to your friend." My husband opened his mouth, stammering, but Miranda cut him off with a smirk. "Oh, is this your +1? My stomach churned at her arrogance. The chatter around us faded as nearby co-workers sensed drama unfolding. My voice trembled slightly as I responded. "I'm his wife." The word hung in the air. Gasps echoed from onlookers who seemed unaware their co-worker was married. Miranda's eyes widened briefly, then she plastered on a condescending grin. "We were just talking," she said, feigning innocence. My husband tried to step in, probably aiming to hustle me out or mitigate the scene. But I raised a hand, halting him. "Talking?" I repeated. "That's an interesting word for the months of texts, the hotel rendezvous, the late nights." A hush descended, tension crackling. Miranda's lips parted in shock. Some employees audibly gasped. My heart hammered, but I pressed on. "You see," I told the small crowd forming, "he's been telling me he has work obligations. And you, Miranda, have been calling me boring, assuming I'd never figure it out." Miranda's cheeks flushed. She tried to speak, perhaps to spin a story, but I wouldn't let her. "I have the messages," I announced, brandishing my phone. "Months of them mocking me, calling me pathetic for not suspecting your affair." I locked eyes with my husband, voice trembling with anger. "You thought you could juggle me at home and her at these parties? Congratulations, you just lost both." Silence reigned, the only sound a distant Christmas tune playing from another room. My husband stammered, "Let's talk somewhere private," but I refused. "I'm done talking privately," I said. "You already talked behind my back." Miranda's veneer of bravado cracked. She shot him a panicked look as though blaming him for the fiasco. He reached for my arm, tears brimming in his eyes, sputtering about how I was overreacting. The nerve of that, me, the faithful spouse, overreacting to discovering a months-long affair. My fury boiled over. I stared at Miranda, summoning the heartbreak she inflicted by scorning me as boring. "How does it feel now?" I asked quietly. "Still find me dull?" The hush in the room was overwhelming. People stood transfixed, some filming with their phones. She trembled, unable to muster a retort. My husband tried to place himself between us, but I stepped back, turning to the onlookers. "I'm sorry if this ruins your party," I said with bitter irony, "but they've ruined my marriage. So we're even." With that, I spun on my heel, walked out the front door, ignoring my husband's frantic calls outside. The cold air struck me, along with a wave of trembling relief. I stumbled to my car, heart racing so fast I thought I might collapse. My phone buzzed with messages from him, from unknown numbers likely belonging to co-workers. My chest burned with the realization that I'd shattered their illusions as publicly as they'd trampled on my dignity. She called me boring. Well, I just ignited a scene no one would forget. My vision blurred with tears, but under the heartbreak, a sense of raw power pulsed. I'd refused to be the quiet, oblivious spouse. I'd made a stand. For the next few days the fallout raged. My husband stormed home, tried to berate me for humiliating him in front of colleagues. I laughed bitterly, reminding him that if he wanted discretion, he shouldn't have flaunted his affair at her parties. He insisted it was never meant to go so far, that they started out as just flirting. I felt a wave of revulsion. He begged me to see a counselor, to work past this meltdown. I stared at him as though he were insane. If he wanted to salvage anything, that chance died the moment he let her mock me behind my back. I told him point blank I'd filed for divorce. I brandished the papers I'd picked up that afternoon. His face fell. "You're joking," he pleaded, voice shaking, claiming he'd do anything. "Then do me a favor," I snapped. "Sign these." He broke down, tears streaming, but I remained firm. My mind was too filled with images of their intimate messages, the contempt she held for me, the sneaking around they orchestrated. No apology would stitch that wound closed. He tried to blame me for always being at home, lacking excitement. The attempt to shift blame sealed the coffin. He said the word boring, echoing her scorn as if that justified his betrayal. My heartbreak twisted into fury. I refused further discussion. I set the divorce papers on the table. "Either sign or I'll see you in court," I told him quietly. Then I walked away. That he actually caved within days, presumably not wanting a protracted legal battle that might reveal more humiliating details. He signed, though he wept about losing me, about how he never meant to hurt me. I felt numb, a sense of finality overshadowing any pity. He tried one last time to contact her, from what I gathered, but apparently she was furious about being publicly outed, and now their romance was tainted by the fiasco. Some mutual acquaintance told me that she refused to see him again, blaming him for letting me ruin her party. The thought gave me grim satisfaction. So he lost me and he lost her. The outcome was precisely what her arrogance deserved. Friends asked me if I regretted causing a scene. Some said I should have confronted them privately. But a woman who sneers at me as boring, thinking I'm too docile to fight back, deserves a dose of public humiliation. My husband similarly needed to grasp the magnitude of his betrayal, not through hushed arguments but through a raw, unfiltered confrontation. I've survived the heartbreak, though not without scars. The dissolution of my marriage was painful, but necessary. I refused to remain a quiet victim. In the months since, I moved out of that house, claiming half the assets in the divorce settlement. Pepper remains with me, a comforting presence at my side. My ex-husband relocated to a smaller place, presumably nursing regret. I don't care. The final hearing was mercifully swift, with a judge acknowledging his infidelity. I walked away with a sense of closure, if not peace. Rebuilding my life after so many illusions crumbled is no easy task, but each day, I remind myself I had the courage to stand up and refuse the role of the oblivious spouse. At 18 night, sometimes I replay the scene in my head, the hush of the crowd, the shock on my husband's face, the terror in Miranda's eyes. My chest tightens with a blend of sorrow and vindication. That confrontation might have been messy, but it was the only way for me to reclaim my power. She called me boring, yet in the end I made the boldest move possible, ensuring he lost us both. If that's what boring looks like, I can't imagine what her definition of exciting might be. I'm learning to trust again. Myself, mostly. I see the red flags I once dismissed. Next time I'll speak up earlier, question suspicious behavior. This heartbreak taught me the cost of ignoring your instincts. Meanwhile, I carry no illusions about my ex's regrets. He made his bed of lies, then watched it collapse in one explosive scene. As for me, I walk forward with head held high, no longer naive but not bitter either. The future is mine to shape, unburdened by a faithless partner or a sneering mistress. They each assumed I'd remain silent and invisible. They discovered the hard way how wrong they were. Looking back, I realized the affair partner's insult, her calling me boring, was a catalyst. It ignited the fierce side of me that refused to be disrespected. I consider it ironically, her attempt at belittling me became the very reason I orchestrated their downfall. If she'd stayed quiet, I might have confronted my husband more discreetly. But her arrogance flipped a switch, fueling me to take center stage at that party. So in a twisted sense, she hammered the final nail into their own coffin. My husband, too complacent, never anticipated the wife he deemed docile could muster such boldness. As I continue rebuilding, forging new hobbies, connecting with supportive friends, I see glimpses of hope. The heartbreak is receding, replaced by a steadier sense of self-worth. I'm forging an identity beyond being someone's wife. If love comes knocking again, I'll approach it with open eyes, lessons in tow. For now, I relish the calm of my new space, the gentle routine Pepper and I share, the sense that I emerged from betrayal not broken, but refined by the flames. People often ask how I managed to be so brave as to cause a scene in front of all those coworkers. The answer is heartbreak drives you to extremes. Once you realize the person you adored has systematically lied, something primal wakes inside you. The humiliation they inflicted can only be answered by reclaiming your dignity, sometimes in a very public way. For me, it was a final stand, a statement that I refused to cower. In that sense, the fallout was worth it. I have no regrets about the meltdown. She lost the smugness, he lost his illusions, and I gained closure. Sometimes, in fleeting moments, I recall the happier days with my husband, lazy Sundays, silly inside jokes. Pain flares, but I remind myself that the man I loved never truly existed as I believed. He wore a mask. Once that mask shattered, I saw the cracks he'd concealed. Letting go was my only option. I made sure he lost both of us, wiping that sneer off his lover's face for good. They might nurse bitterness or call me vengeful, but I only see it as righteous defense of my dignity. Now I stand free, forging a future on my terms, a testament to my resilience. And if anyone dares call me boring, well, they better be prepared for me to prove them wrong yet again.